gave up managing billions to become a better investor. Episode 8. Can you have too much of a good thing? Hello. It's kind of interesting to see the words of John Maynard Keynes, who you may recall once said, "The market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent." It's a great quote, and it has a lot of relevance to my previous podcast, actually, about psychology and that important role when thinking about an investment. It's funny, isn't it, that there are many things that people believe that you need to do to become a good investor or an above average investor or improve as an investor. Some believe it's lots and lots of analysis and related. And I kind of feel that I always often see people with tons and tons of gear, but no idea, in terms of sometimes great education, lots of books, even sometimes throwing a lot of time and effort at it. But ultimately, you need a little bit of instinct or nous or drive or something like that. Certainly awareness of analysis and research and numbers and stuff like that we already talked about in previous podcasts. That is super important. You need to think about psychology too, acknowledge what Keynes, the Keynes quote I just said, and understand that that's important as well. But ultimately, and in terms of my own career, thinking about important quotes or stats or related that I liked, I remember two in particular when thinking about whether things are always going to be great or not. First, it's the reality that it is a 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration sort of world. That is so unbelievably true. You know, you might get your head around analysis and numbers, even psychology to some extent, as much as you can. But then ultimately, unless you're working hard and continuing to do work, you're not going to have any success really as an investor. You might get lucky now and again, but there's not going to be that sort of regular flow of attractive results or good results or over a year or two, a solid performance. That's just not going to work. It is a 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration sort of world. The other thing, of course, is the Pareto principle. I'm sure you've heard of it, but for those who haven't, this sort of acknowledgement that 80% of returns or capability or whatever comes from 20% of the inputs. That is so true. And I think it's relevant for investment from the basis that 80% of your returns do tend to come from only 20% of your investments. And some people, of course, have made careers and perhaps had good investment performances from just one great call, which they've allowed to run and run and run. As we talked about before in a previous podcast, ultimately you've got to decide when you need to sort of step away. You can't hold everything forever. The world just doesn't sort of work that way, or at least unless you're using hindsight asset management, it doesn't kind of work that way. Ultimately, it does make sense to take some profits. I talked in my previous podcast about how I halved a position that turned out to be my most successful position of all time, certainly in my life so far. I took half of it out when I doubled my money and let the rest run. And that felt kind of correct to me at the time, and it did work out quite well. So certainly this acceptance that the Pareto principle is out there, but believe me, unless you're of a unbelievably insightful nature, ultimately it still makes sense to take some profit, certainly when you've made a good return, even if you let some of that money carry on because you still believe in the story, having appraised it already and kind of perceived that the world isn't completely in love with this perception. Because as I say, the psychological aspect is so important. If something is already overly loved, and again, it's always better to be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy, as per normal. But that this notion that when something does become an obsession of the average investor, that's when you've got to already be out or be looking to move out of something. And vice versa, of course, if something has fallen very out of favor, but there's fundamentally a good and interesting story, that's when things become interesting. So I guess it's kind of an interesting backdrop out there, this whole investment world. It is a world where I believe if you can be a 5 out of 10 investor, you can make a successful investment portfolio out of it. You just need to be kind of common sense, attract sort of an attacked and perceived common sense from all other perspectives too. Just being a 5 out of 10 investor alone is not enough, but it certainly gives you that kind of backdrop to allow you to outperform markets, to do better than the other investment alternatives out there that you could take and related. but you do need a bit of luck. You do need that sort of aspect of, oh my goodness, something has worked out wonderfully for me. Luck, of course, you make your own luck, as the saying goes, and that is very true. You do tend to get luck from working hard. It's all 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration sort of perspective. Absolutely true. But a little bit of luck does help. And sometimes you can be lucky at the strangest times and in the strangest ways, but it's how you then react to that and maybe hopefully take advantage of it, then that becomes all important. It's kind of fascinating, isn't it, that I also think that the final 10% of any investment, not just individual choice, but sort of any sort of general investment perception, how you think about a portfolio or the investment concept or whatever, is kind of mega important too. I remember many, many years ago, my goodness, it must be a couple of decades ago now, I remember thinking that a youngster, even to me at that point, was somebody who didn't really have what I would perceive as that final 10%. They were a good investor in the sense of they could work very well as an analyst, they could pull together a good presentation, but they were just a bit scared on that final aspect of putting the trigger down and saying, yep, this is a buy, this is a sell, or whatever the big call requirement was. And it is that final 10% that you've also got to have as an investor. If you don't have that sort of acceptance that you could be wrong, but you're going to take a risk and you're going to do something based on your research, your appraisal, macro insight, psychological appraisal, whatever it might be, you're going to do it. Because believe me, any investor who's not brave enough to actually do the investment and accept that they could be wrong and actually regularly will be wrong is never going to be a good investor. That's another concept that you always really need to have. And it's never really bothered me accepting that I will be wrong sometimes because, history has shown me that I am wrong on a frequent basis and that I'm absolutely fine with that. Frankly, I worry about people who say that they're never wrong or they're only wrong once in a long moon or something like that. That is the incorrect way to think about things because that kind of tells me that they're not being truthful. Reality is that everybody, every investor, even the most famous investors out there will accept that they are wrong on a fairly regular basis. But of course, how you react to that, how you take those losses, how you accept that you've made a mistake and move on, or perhaps reassess everything and say, wow, this is actually an even better opportunity to buy something. There's many different ways that you can react to it, but you've got to learn to do that. If you don't learn to accept that sometimes you will make mistakes and learn from them, then you'll never become a great investor or have any hope of that. Becoming a good investor is not just sort of a God-given right. It's not you're not born with it. It's through mostly hard work, good appraisal, good analysis, good understanding, and keeping on learning, going back to the start and thinking again and working your way back through. This is why I call it a game in a way, mainly because there is no way that you can convince everyone that you are a great investor, full stop. It's from constant application and work. That's how you gain that insight and actually become a better investor yourself as you get older, as you learn more and see more. And this is why I say to everybody, it doesn't matter whether you've got all the right educational careers or none of those backgrounds, whether you've spent time as a professional investor or not. There are always improvements and everything, every sort of obvious gain that you can make from your investment appraisal. And believe me, everybody can become a better investor. Everyone can learn to become even a good investor or even a semi-great investor. Anything is possible in life. That's what's exciting about it. It's from your own application. That's what really matters. So actually, don't worry if you're not the Fred Astaire of investment. That doesn't matter. What matters much more is that you're becoming better and you're improving. And if you're improving, and certainly if you're getting to that point of sort of a 5 out of 10 kind of score, then my guess is you've got the justification from a financial perspective to manage your own investments or something like that. I kind of feel for people who are not really achieving that sort of level of return are probably kind of wasting their time a little bit, because unless you're continuing to try to improve to get yourself to at or above that level, then probably it is better for somebody else to manage your money. Whilst that's a fine thing to see in the earlier parts of an investment life, of you trying the whole investment area and learning from your mistakes and improving from that, if after a period of time you're still not really a 5 out of 10 investor, then I'm afraid probably the best thing to do is let somebody else manage the money, a formal institution or something like that, and concentrate on something that you do love, something that you do have passion for and capability with. And that's the way life is always. So as you see, lots of kind of interesting concepts really. Don't worry about always trying to be a good investor, but believe me, everybody has the capability to be one. It's just a question of hard work and an application, really. That's all. Even though it's a that's all, it's just a tiny that's all. It's obviously a huge and time-consuming thing. And as I say, unless you are willing to put time into this investment backdrop and investment story, then believe me, it isn't going to work. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say here. Once again, I've probably said very little, but I spent some time doing so. But hopefully there's some points of interest there. The next time I'll be talking about the daily routine, sort of this concept of what a sensible investor thinks about and sort of does on a daily or a weekly basis in order to try to make sure that they are a good investor, or at least a valuable investor, somebody who can add value for their investment portfolio or other obligations. So anyway, that's in the next podcasts. Look forward to speaking to you about that then, and goodbye.